Abina had always been a woman of faith, raised in a home where prayer and seeking God's guidance were daily practices. But as she grew older, the noise of the world became louder, drowning out the voice of God in her life. She was ambitious, driven, and eager to build a future for herself. Marriage had always been part of that vision, but she never imagined it would be her downfall. When she met Kweku, she was captivated. He was everything she thought she wanted: charming, successful, and seemingly devoted to her. He pursued her with an intensity that made her feel cherished. He spoke of a future filled with love and abundance, of a partnership where they would build an empire together. Abina saw no reason to doubt him. She had stopped praying about major decisions, believing she could trust her own judgment. If she had asked God, perhaps he would have warned her. Their wedding was the talk of the town, a grand celebration of love and wealth. Abina felt like a queen as she walked down the aisle, unaware that she was walking into a prison. At first, marriage was sweet. Kweku was attentive, showering her with gifts and compliments. He made her feel like she was the center of his world. But slowly, his affection turned into control. At first, it was small things: criticizing how she dressed, questioning who she spoke to, making offhanded comments that chipped away at her confidence. Then, the control grew stronger. He decided what she wore, who she could visit, and even how she spent money. Abina tried to rationalize his behavior. Maybe he just loved her too much. Maybe she needed to be more understanding. But deep inside, something felt wrong. She was losing herself. When she became pregnant, she hoped it would bring them closer. But instead, Kweku became distant. He barely acknowledged her growing belly, showed no excitement about their child, and refused to accompany her to doctor's appointments. She spent many nights crying herself to sleep. But she never told anyone. She was too ashamed. The night she went into labor, she called Kweku in panic, but he never picked up. She struggled through the pain, calling a taxi on her own. She gave birth alone, with no one by her side. When Kweku finally arrived, hours later, he acted as though nothing had happened. "You should have been stronger," he said coldly before turning his attention to his phone. It was the first moment she truly realized she had married a stranger. Life after childbirth was even worse. Kweku resented the attention she gave their baby. He hated that she was no longer focused on him. He dismissed her exhaustion, belittled her struggles, and criticized her for not looking put together enough. If she dared to complain, he reminded her of the life he provided, as if she were nothing without him. Abina tried to make things work. She prayed, though her prayers felt hollow. She told herself that if she just loved Kweku enough, if she obeyed him enough, he would change. But love was not enough to fix a man who thrived on control. As their family grew, so did the tension in their home. Their children, Kwame, Kwezi, and Afia, lived under the shadow of their father's harshness. They tiptoed around him, always careful not to upset him. He never had time for them. He never praised them. His love was something they were forced to earn, but no matter how hard they tried, they always failed in his eyes. Dinner time became a dreaded routine. The children would sit quietly at the table, staring at their untouched food, while Kweku sat across from them, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to their presence. They longed for his attention, for even a small sign that he cared. But he was emotionally absent, lost in his own world. One evening, Afia accidentally knocked over a glass of juice, spilling it onto Kweku's laptop. The room went silent. Fear gripped her small body as Kweku turned to her, his face twisted with rage. Without a second thought, he slapped her across the face. She fell to the floor, sobbing, her tiny hands clutching her burning cheek. Abina's world shattered in that moment. She had endured his cruelty for years, but this was too much. That night, she sat in the darkness of her room, listening to her children cry themselves to sleep. She had made a terrible mistake. For years, she had ignored God. She had chosen a man without seeking his guidance. She had walked into a marriage that was destroying not just her, but her children. One evening, Kweku snapped. She had confronted him about another woman she had seen on his phone. Instead of denial, he laughed. "And what will you do about it? Leave. You have no one." Abina. Then, he grabbed her tight, the final threat, and her heart shattered. At that moment, she realized if she didn't leave, she would lose herself completely. That night, Abina packed her bags. There was no goodbye, just a silent departure under the cover of darkness. As the car pulled away, tears streamed down her face, not tears of sadness but of freedom. Kweku thought she would come back. After all, she always did before. But days turned to weeks and weeks to months. She never returned. His once lively and happy home now felt cold and empty. With Abina gone, Kweku turned his cruelty toward the children. He was emotionally absent, providing only the bare minimum. At dinner, they sat in silence while their father scrolled through his phone, ignoring them. They longed for their mother, but mentioning her name was forbidden. Kweku had always painted himself as the victim, especially to his children. But as they grew, they saw through his lies. They saw how he manipulated them, how he controlled their every move. One by one, they began to distance themselves. He was losing the family he thought he owned. Their children, Kwame, Kwezi, and Afia, lived under the shadow of their father's harshness. They tiptoed around him, always careful not to upset him. He never had time for them. He never praised them. His love was something they were forced to earn, but no matter how hard they tried, they always failed in his eyes. He owned. When they failed to meet his impossible standards, he punished them severely. His words broke their spirits, and fear ruled their lives. They stopped smiling. His words cut deeper than knives. One day, after a particularly cruel punishment, the eldest son said, "I can't take this anymore." Immediately, the other children followed their brother. One by one, they left Kweku's house, each vowing never to return. Kweku sat alone in his grand house, the silence unbearable, surrounded by everything but love. He had driven everyone away. Abina finally surrendered to God. She prayed, fasted, and asked for forgiveness for trusting in her own wisdom. As her relationship with God grew, Abina realized only God can fill the void in a person's heart. Years passed. The children, now teenagers, had only one mission: to find their mother. They searched tirelessly, following vague leads and distant memories. Finally, they found her staying with a relative in a quiet town. When Abina opened the door and saw them standing at the door, she felt as if she couldn't breathe. Her babies, now grown, stood before her. Their eyes filled with pain and longing. They were older, but still wounded. "I'm so sorry," she wept, holding them tightly. "I was selfish. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I didn't consider what would happen to you." "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, holding them tightly. "I thought I was protecting you, but I failed you. I should have never left you behind." Through tears, she apologized. "I made a selfish decision. I ignored God's direction and guidance. I'm so sorry." With a trembling voice, Abina whispered, "I'm sorry. I should have never put you through this. I was selfish. I didn't seek God's guidance, and it cost us everything." Abina realized then that running had not been enough. She had to acknowledge her mistakes, to seek forgiveness not just from her children, but from God. In the end, Abina realized the greatest mistake of her life was turning away from God's guidance. She had walked blindly into a marriage that nearly destroyed her and her children. She had leaned on her own understanding, and it had led her to ruin. But God had been merciful. He had brought her children back to her. He had given her a second chance. Abina decided to start over. With her children by her side, she built a new life, filled with love and faith in God. Abina's story became a testimony. She dedicated her life to helping women avoid the mistakes she made, teaching them to seek God first in all things. Her suffering became her strength, her pain became her purpose, and her past became a lesson for others. She finally understood what true peace felt like, peace that only God could give. Meanwhile, Kweku sat alone in his once beautiful home. His pride had cost him everything, his wife, his children, and the love he had taken for granted. He scrolled through old pictures on his phone, realizing too late that he had destroyed his own family. She now lived by Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 6. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight." Her story was one of pain, but also one of redemption. She had found her way back to God, and in doing so, she had found herself. She would never walk alone again. She had learned the most important lesson of all: God's guidance was not optional. It was the only way to truly live. This story is a warning and a lesson. If Abina had sought God's guidance, she wouldn't have married a narcissist. If she had listened to his voice, she wouldn't have lost herself. But God, in his mercy, restored her and her children. Let this be a reminder: seek God first. Trust him. Only he can lead you to true love. If this story touched you, like, share, and subscribe. And in the comments, tell us, have you ever made a life-altering decision without God? Thank you for watching.